Hello guys, welcome to Exercise Physiology Screencast 2. Basically what I'm going to do today is quite a long screencast, I've got to be honest, because some people have just completely gone missing, so this might be my only contact with some people before the exam. Obviously this is provided as preparation for Saturday's revision session. I've sent the times for those, so yeah, I'll need to get on with it because I've got lots to fit in on this. Now basically these questions are hard. Okay, they're on here for a reason. They are the hardest questions you could get. I will highlight the ones I think that are most likely. Okay, so, some of these will have memory methods, others won't. You know the drill by now, so I'll just get straight into it. Okay, so this is a question that came up that I've kind of explained to a couple of people. It's a tough one. Explain the lactate levels shown in the areas marked unsustainable. Now, you could get a question asked about easy, hard, or unsustainable, but we're particularly concerned with unsustainable. Now, if you look down here, this was actually a 20-mark question, and it looked at the kind of reasons for the trend in lactate levels shown in the areas marked easy, hard, unsustainable. Now what I want to do is think it's already been a 20, so we can have a look at it as how they could put it as part of like a smaller question. So as you see here, explain the training methods can be used to increase a performance lactate threshold. Now I talked to you about that in the revision sessions in half term, that anything to do with improving lactate threshold is ultimately trying to make you aerobically fitter. So what we're talking about then is the point where lactate accumulates is going to be later. In order for that to happen, we need to be able to work easily for longer. In order to work easily for longer, we need to be aerobically fitter. Anyway, that's going away from this question. So this one, when it's unsustainable, we need to explain the lactate levels. So straight away, and I've said this to people just lose the plot. And they see that, and I get it, because when I first saw it, I lost the plot. What we're looking for is this lactate level here. So it's looking at the millimole, so we have to look at what how much lactate is accumulated in millimole there. Okay, but then we've got the kind of power or kind of heart rate here. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just onto the middle slide. So basically, in an unsustainable, so when lactate's unsustainable, what I need you to do is to think, right, when we use, there isn't actually a section in the exam in the spec called lactate. There's no thing, but what there is, lactate is part of an abbreviation within exercise physiology to do with obviously lactic acid, but lactate is something that we use slightly differently. So what I'm asking you to do is, can you work out the abbreviation that lactate comes from? When you've done that, can you say what those words stand for? Then can you describe what it is? When you've done that, can you provide a value it's reached at? And then when you reach that value, what happens and why does it happen? I'm very aware this isn't easy, okay, but what I do know is that you know that AL fits into an abbreviation. You should know a description of it, and you should know the value at which it becomes that. Then what I need you to do is the last bit is what and why it becomes unsustainable. So lactate, so the AL, so where's it come from, blah blah blah. It's unsustainable because they've reached the point of obla. Obla is the thing we're looking at, so the onset of blood lactate accumulation. You should write that, okay? So what I put there, when blood lactate reaches 4 millimole, okay, that is beyond your lactate threshold, okay? So that basically means that the lactate production exceeds the kind of speed in which we can remove it. So there's too much there, and then that is then where we have extreme problems. Now what happens as a result of this kind of obla being reached, that value be happening, and then the production exceeding the removal speed? This is what happens. The lactate levels are so high it leads to exhaustion. Okay, now where does this exhaustion come from? This is when people just absolutely had it, knackered. That is because of there's a rise in pyruvate or pyruvic acid. I think sometimes it's easier to think of that concept of acid rising, pyruvic acid rising. As a result of that, there's a direct decrease in pH levels, blood pH levels. Now that then causes a denaturing of the enzymes, and it kind of stimulates the pain receptors. Okay, and this then causes you to have to stop exercising, so you'd have to stop, take a breather, whatever. Okay, so that's your first one done. Okay, moving on. Next question. Next one, quite a nice little link here, because we're talking about lactacid or lactate again. So describe the lactacid recovery system. We looked at the A-lactacids, we looked at the absence of lactic acid. Now because there's no A in front of it, okay, A remembers the first letter of the alphabet, A means the absence. Now what we're looking for is there's no A there. Okay, so because there's no A there, we now need to look at this bit and say, right, a lactacid recovery system. So lactacid recovery system, we need to consider these questions. What? So in terms of order, of recovery system is it? Okay, what is the key focus of it? Linked to this word. How do we do it? So we need to think about that concept of lactic acid. Okay, when we started to get epoch, then we're starting to look at how it happens. Then we need to start thinking about kind of these two hows are linked to kind of percentages. Okay, and if we can understand that, you are really onto the kind of a winner here. And then finally, we've got our easy 2 marks at the end, which basically say, okay, how much oxygen is required, okay, and then how long does it take? And then we've got those kind of final bits there that we've kind of what, how. You could say how. Okay, so but a lot of this is linked to what we did for the lactacid. So now straight away we know it's a second and slow component of recovery. It uses EPOC, remember that excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, because we've stopped running, because we've slowed down, because we've got lots of oxygen flooding in. This helps to remove lactic acid accumulate during exercise. Mark 1, Mark 2. Now, how does that happen? Now, 60%, if you remember from the aerobic system kind of in the aerobic system diagram you've seen, you can see that basically lactic acid, where you have that bit where you said when aerobic metabolism takes place, lactic acid doesn't take place. What happens to lactic acid is it's 60% of it is converted back into pyruvate, if you remember that diagram, and then it enters a Krebs cycle to be metabolized aerobically, so using the O2 from EPOC. So basically that 60% is lactic acid. 60% of lactic acid is converted back into pyruvic acid, and enters the Krebs cycle, remember the aerobic energy system, because we've now got oxygen available, so it can be aerobically metabolized. Now the other way it happens, the rest of it, I mean we could talk about other percentages, but I think for this let's just stick to basics. The rest is transported to liver as lactate. Now when it's if you think about that, so it goes back to the liver as lactate, and then if you imagine it going back up, okay, rather than we've talked about going into the Krebs cycle's first 60%, so the rest of it's transported. If you imagine it, it's then kind of resynthesized and it goes back up the aerobic system chain. So it's then resynthesized to glycogen via glycogenesis, remember my fun saying that last time, and then also going back up again to glucose via gluconeogenesis. So basically what you've got there, you don't have to know these two key things here, you just need to know that it's resynthesized to glycogen and glucose. Also urea, you can talk about sweat and urine. Do we really need that? I think that's enough. Now for those people who think, oh my god, that has absolutely just killed me, okay, you will get at least 3 to 4 out of 5 marks by saying the 1, 2, and then by saying how long. So it takes an hour to fully happen, and then how much? 5 to 8 litres. Remember I told you to say 3 to 5 for alactacid, 5 to 8 for this, 2 to 3 minutes for alactic acid, alactacid recovery, 1 hour for lactacid. And then I think this is pretty straightforward, but that's up to you to decide whether you can decipher that and put that into an answer. I hope you can. Okay, right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to be very quick on these. I'm not really going to talk through them. I'm just going to put them on there. There are factors affecting both aerobic capacity, strength, and flexibility. And I just wanted you to see that they have a common theme. There's a common acronym that you can use for all of them. Sometimes you need to add things to them. Sometimes slight little variants. But I just thought, if you're talking about training programs and a training program comes up, it's important that you understand that kind of any factors affecting whether it's aerobic capacity, strength or flexibility are linked to this acronym TAG. Now some of them have extras, okay, so for example flexibility, one of the G's changes to a J, okay, so you can have a quick look through those now. I will let you stop. I haven't done strength because that was so heavily examined last summer, so I've left that out. Okay, I'm sure you can kind of make your own link, like testosterone, etc. But if I just let you have a look at that, I'm going to let you pause that and move on. Right, training programs for flexibility, strength, aerobic capacity. Now, strength obviously very, very unlikely, but you could get a question like I gave you in the 20-mark question session that just gives poor scores in a variety of different kind of tests, and you have to design a training program for that for each of those. So, for example, sit and reach, they had a poor score. I don't know. Press-up test, they had a poor score. 1 rep max, they had a poor score. Cooper's run or multi-stage fitness test, poor score. Body composition, poor score. And if it has all those, you've got to be able to provide a training program for them. Now, for a training program, basically, if something like that come up and it's multiple, you would have to be able to think about, right, what am I going to do in order to ensure that I can make a decent training program, the first thing you do is you have to link it to one specific principle of training. Now, I'm going to give you all of the principles of training later, but the first one is looking at, if a training program came up and it asked you to do just one, these are the things you'd have to think about. What I'm particularly focusing on now is principles of training, and the key principle of training to ensure that any component of fitness is improved is the fit principle. So basically what you need to have a look at here is just to make sure you have an understanding of the basic fit principles that you would need in order to improve a weak area of your fitness. Now, bearing in mind you only look at flexibility, strength, aerobic capacity, I just thought it'd be a good little recap thing to have a look through this. Again, I'm not going to talk through it. I'm just going to ask you to look at this and make sure you understand that the fit principle is the component within overload. We'll have a look at the principles of training in a second when you could apply if this question came up, which I'll go through on Saturday. So next one. Periodization then. So how can periodization aid the planning of a personal fitness program? Now, periodization, you need to have an understanding of definition. So periodization, basically, if you were just thinking to take a word out of that, you'd circle period. Basically, you're kind of organizing your training into kind of periods or blocks, okay, in order to peak at the right time. So straight away, if you go like that, it's an organized division of training into a number of specific blocks, periods or phases. Now, why not use periods? Okay, because we can take that out of period. The objective is for them to progressively, or an athlete progressively develop and reach physiological peak. Now, how do you do it? So what I've done here for a personal fitness program, we're going to use the scenario of a marathon runner. Okay, so a marathon runner, basically, how would they do it? So basically, you've got a macro cycle. Now, it's a key thing for this, and this is one of the advantages, benefits of periodization. It directly links to goal setting at perfect timing, really, because we're expecting goal setting as our 20-mark question for psychology, and it perfectly splits into our time-based goals. So macro cycle is your kind of long-term goal. Okay, so for example, it could be up to a year. We're going to use a 6-month example here. So we're saying 6 months time, the goal is to run in a marathon. That is your macro cycle. Don't worry about mega cycle. Okay, all I'm going to say. So macro cycles then, okay, we need to know that it's 6 months up to a year. And basically, a macro cycle is made up of many different mesocycles, which are your medium-term goals. Remember, if you set a macro cycle on its own, it could be quite daunting, anxiety, you don't need to know that, but that's just linked to our goal-setting stuff. Then you've got a mesocycle. Now, a mesocycle is a medium-term goal that lasts anywhere between 1 and 4 months, and you can have several of these. Okay, so the key focus, or the goal, that would be within this kind of medium-term goals would be to improve your aerobic capacity in a number of different ways. Okay, so it could be, well, let's just leave it at that. So in pre-season, okay, so for example, if we linked it to kind of, if you took out what went away from a marathon, you could have pre-season, competition and off-season. They're examples of mesocycles. Or you could have early marathon training, mid-marathon training, and kind of close to the marathon training. Okay, so they would be 3 kind of splits. Now, as a result of that, within those are microcycles, and these are the short-term goals. So they literally last from like kind of 1 session to 3 weeks, and they can also be called a recruitment unit. So in an example of how you would do this, you perform interval, continuous, or fartlek training, because these are the training types that would allow you to improve the aerobic capacity that would be required to run a marathon. Okay, key focus of any periodization is it allows athletes to peak at the correct time, and it also allows short, medium and long-term goals to be set alongside it. Now, the next thing that allows it to happen is it allows you to kind of combine the principles of training. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is describe the principles of training. Okay, it'll probably link to periodization or training programs, as put there. Can you remember the acronym for it? Okay, so principles of training. If we look onto there, principles of training are as follows. So you've got the VROMPs. Now, can you remember what they stand for? And can you describe them? That's your aim, to try and be able to do that. Answer. So variance. Okay, so basically different types of training will prevent boredom. Okay, so interval, fartlek and continuous. Reversibility. Use it or lose it, or if you put it in technical terms, any improvements in fitness will be lost through inactivity. Overload, in every training session you have to work harder than the one you did previously. Now, in order for that to happen, what we've talked about earlier is the fit principle. So you have to apply the fit principle to all training sessions if you want to make training gains, whether that's muscle hypertrophy, whether that's aerobic capacity. So you've got frequency, intensity, time, type. Now that could be linked to any of the things which I showed you earlier. Then you've got moderation. So if you moderate what you do, it stops overtraining, which can cause injury. Progression, overload should be applied gradually, and finally specificity.